My son-in-law humiliated me in front of his parents in my own mansion. You won't believe what I did next. And they'll never forget it. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The air in the villa was different. It carried the scent of salt from the distant sea, mingling with the sweet perfume of night-blooming jasmine that climbed the stone walls of the courtyard. I had designed this place with my late Mary, every line, every stone a testament to a life built on patience and quiet strength. Now I had invited my family here for a retreat, a weekend I had carefully orchestrated with a secret, hopeful purpose. My intention at the end of our stay was to hand them the keys, to announce that this villa was my gift to Jennifer and Eric, a foundation for their future, a place for our family to gather and heal the fractures that had quietly been forming for years. But for now, I let them believe I had splurged on a high-end rental, a foolish extravagance for a retired old man. Jennifer, my daughter, floated through the rooms, her voice a high, tinkling sound as she marveled at the infinity pool that seemed to spill directly into the twilight sky. "Daddy, this must have cost you a fortune," she'd exclaimed, her eyes wide, not with appreciation for the craftsmanship, but with the calculation of its perceived cost. Eric, her husband, a man whose ambition was as loud and artless as his designer watch, strutted around like he owned the place. He clapped me on the back, a gesture of condescending bonhomie. "I have to hand it to you, Henry," he said, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that always grated on my nerves. "Living it up in your golden years. I hope you got a good deal on this place. These rentals can be a real drain." "A drain," I smiled, a quiet, humorless thing. His words sent me back a year to a sun-drenched afternoon in a sleek, glass-walled real estate office overlooking the ocean. The agent, a polished woman named Ms. Evelyn Reed, had regarded me with a professional but slightly dismissive air. I was an old man in a simple linen shirt and comfortable shoes, not her usual clientele of tech billionaires and film producers. "It's a magnificent property, Mr. Miller," she had said, her voice smooth as polished marble. 5 bedrooms, each with an ocean-facing balcony nestled in a secluded cove just an hour's drive from Los Angeles. The previous owner was a well-known architect. It's truly a one-of-a-kind estate. She paused, her gaze flicking over me as if assessing my financial viability. "The asking price is $3.4 million. I had looked at the photos, the clean lines, the seamless integration of wood and stone, the way the house seemed to grow out of the cliffside. It was the house Mary and I had always dreamed of, a place of peace and beauty, a place for family. "I'll take it," I had said quietly. Ms. Reed blinked, a flicker of surprise in her professional composure. "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "We can begin the process of arranging financing and—" "That won't be necessary," I had interrupted gently. "I'll be paying in cash." The look on her face, the sudden shift from polite condescension to wide-eyed respect, was a small, private satisfaction. Now standing in the living room of that very villa, listening to my son-in-law's casual dismissal, I felt a familiar, weary pang of irony. Tom and Eleanor arrived shortly after Eric and Jennifer, their presence adding another layer to the polished facade. Eleanor, elegant in a tailored linen suit, surveyed the living area with a discerning eye. "My dear Henry," she cooed, her voice a well-modulated purr. "This is simply delightful. Such expansive taste for a weekend getaway. Are you sure you'll manage all this space?" Her compliment felt less like admiration and more like a gentle interrogation. Tom, ever the businessman, clasped my hand with a firm, practiced grip. "Henry, my boy, truly impressive. I heard Eric mention it was a rental. Must have pulled some strings to get a place like this in May. What's the daily rate on a property of this caliber? Just curious, you understand. Always interested in the market." His questions, delivered with a hearty chuckle, were a thinly veiled attempt to gauge my financial limits. I offered a non-committal smile, letting them draw their own conclusions about my supposed extravagance. Eric was holding court by the massive kitchen island, while Jennifer filmed the view from the balcony for her followers. My eyes, however, drifted to the alcove near the main entrance. There, on a handcrafted mahogany stand, sat my Japanese black pine. It was a gnarled, ancient-looking thing in a simple ceramic pot, its needles a deep, healthy green. To the untrained eye, it was just a plant, a piece of decorative foliage that came with the rental. But to me, it was a living monument to patience. I remembered the day Mary and I bought it 7 years ago. We'd spent an entire afternoon at a specialty nursery, a hidden gem of a place run by a third-generation bonsai master. We didn't just buy it, we chose it. This one, Mary had said, her hand gently tracing the line of its trunk. It's endured, it's been shaped by time and care, but its strength is its own. The $7,000 price tag had been incidental. What we were paying for was the story, the decades of meticulous care, the art, the symbol of a life lived with intention, a life we had built together. It was our quiet promise to each other to continue growing, to find beauty in imperfection and strength in endurance. You see, this is the part they would never understand. To them, the villa is a rental, a commodity with a price tag Eric can boast about. And the bonsai, if they notice it at all, is just another prop on the stage. They see the price of everything and the value of nothing. They are utterly oblivious to the fact that the two most significant objects in this house, the structure itself and this small, resilient tree, are deeply, irrevocably mine. Eric's voice, dripping with arrogance, pulled me from my thoughts again. You know, at Omnicorp, we're all about results. It's a high-pressure environment. Only the strong survive. As HR director, I'm the gatekeeper. I decide who has what it takes. I watched him, a faint, weary smile touching my lips. Omnicorp Global. He spoke of it as if he had built it himself. He had no idea. He couldn't possibly know that the quiet, retired old man he was patronizing held a 10% ownership stake in the entire global enterprise, a relic from a past life of building and acquiring companies. He didn't know that his prestigious position as gatekeeper hadn't been earned through his own indomitable strength, but had been secured with a single discreet phone call I'd made to an old friend on the board after Jennifer had tearfully told me Eric was struggling to find a position worthy of his talents. The initial hope I'd felt, that warm, golden feeling that had filled the room just an hour ago, was beginning to cool. It was being replaced by something else, a cold, clear-eyed resolve. I watched them move through my house, touching my things, oblivious and ungrateful. The weekend was just beginning. The stage was set just as I'd planned, but now I found myself watching the play from a different perspective. I was no longer just the benefactor. I was becoming the audience, waiting for the inevitable climax. The tension had been building all afternoon, a low-frequency hum beneath the clinking of glasses and the forced, polite laughter. I watched them from the stone veranda, my silence a stark contrast to Eric's boisterous monologue. He was in his element, a self-appointed king holding court in a borrowed castle, completely unaware that he was a guest in my home. He gestured with his glass of my best single malt, the amber liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "It's all about decisive action, Tom," he said, his voice resonating with the self-satisfied authority of a man who believes his own press releases. "At Omnicorp, we don't have time for sentiment. If a branch is weak, you prune it. That's how the tree stays strong." With a casual, almost deliberate carelessness, his hand swung out as he turned. It wasn't a clumsy accident. It was an act of dismissive contempt. His knuckles connected with the upper branch of my Japanese black pine. There was a soft, sickening snap. The sound, though quiet, was as loud as a gunshot in the suddenly still air. A perfectly formed branch, one I had spent 7 years wiring and pruning to achieve its delicate windswept curve, lay on the polished floor. 20 years of a master's care, 7 years of my own, destroyed in a single thoughtless second. Silence descended. Jennifer's hand flew to her mouth, a flicker of genuine shock in her eyes. Tom and Eleanor exchanged a quick, unreadable glance. Eric, however, just chuckled. He bent down, not with remorse but with a theatrical flourish, and picked up the severed branch. He examined it for a moment before attempting to clumsily stick it back onto the tree, a foolish, futile gesture that only highlighted his utter lack of understanding. The broken limb lolled pathetically, a testament to his oafishness. He then simply let it drop back to the polished floor, a dismissive gesture that sealed its fate. I said nothing. I simply walked over to the bonsai, my steps measured and calm. I knelt down, ignoring Eric, and gently picked up the broken branch. Its needles were still a deep, vibrant green, its life sap already beginning to weep from the wound. I ran my thumb over the clean, brutal snap, my mind already assessing the damage, considering the intricate work it would take to try and mend it. "Don't worry, Henry," Eric said, his voice dripping with a casual, dismissive arrogance. He watched me with a smirk, as if observing a curious insect. "I can pay for this. You truly are a responsible gardener, but a man in my position shouldn't be bothering with such menial tasks anyway." I straightened up, still holding the broken branch. My gaze locked with his, my voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "This tree, Eric," I said. "This little fragile thing you just broke, it costs $7,000. Are you prepared to spend $7,000 to fix your mistake?" The smirk on his face faltered. The number hung in the air, a palpable, shocking thing. Jennifer gasped. "Daddy, that's ridiculous. It's just a plant." Eric scoffed, a desperate attempt to regain his footing. $7,000 for a twig? You're lying, Henry. No one would be that foolish." "Daddy, you're making too big a deal out of this," Jennifer chimed in, her voice shrill with embarrassment. She rushed to Eric's side, a loyal soldier defending her king. "Eric said he would pay for it. Just send him a bill for whatever a new one costs." I looked at them, this perfect polished pair, and a cold, profound clarity washed over me. This was not about a broken branch. This was about a broken bond, a broken trust, a broken family. But the time for confrontation was not now. The seeds of my response needed to be sown in quiet, fertile ground. I summoned a calm I didn't feel, a placid mask to hide the raging storm within. "It's all right," I said, my voice a gentle, disarming murmur. I waved a dismissive hand, mimicking Eric's earlier gesture. "Don't worry about it. The insurance will cover it." "Insurance?" Tom asked, his brow furrowed. "The rental agency has insurance for the plants?" "Of course," I lied, my voice as smooth as polished marble. "For a property of this value, they insure everything. It's no trouble at all." The relief in the room was immediate and palpable. They had been absolved. The crisis was averted. Eric, his confidence restored, clapped me on the shoulder again. "See? All that fuss over nothing. That's what I like about dealing with professionals. No messy emotions, just practical solutions." He thought he had won. He thought he had once again demonstrated his superiority, his ability to brush aside the sentimental concerns of a foolish old man. He had no idea that my lie was not an act of forgiveness. It was an act of war. It was the calm before the storm, the quiet, deliberate act of a man who was about to dismantle their entire world, one broken promise at a time. I looked at the severed branch in my hand, then at my daughter's face, her expression a mixture of relief and lingering annoyance. And in that moment, something inside me, the last stubborn ember of a father's unconditional love, grew cold. The gardener was indeed about to prune a weak branch, but it wasn't on the tree. That night I feigned a headache, a plausible ailment for a man of my age, and retired early. The rest of the weekend was a masterclass in polite detachment. I listened to their plans, their gossip, their casual dismissals of the world outside their gilded cage, all while my own plans were quietly taking root. On Sunday evening, I saw them off with a warm, grandfatherly smile, waving until their luxury SUV disappeared down the long, winding driveway. The moment they were gone, the smile vanished from my face. The performance was over. It was time to begin the work. The next morning, I sat not on the sun-drenched veranda of my villa, but in the quiet, familiar study of my own home. The air smelled of old books and lemon oil, a scent of steadfastness and memory. I picked up the phone. My first call was to the private banking division of my longtime financial institution. "Good morning, this is Henry Miller," I said to the familiar voice of my account manager. "I need to make a change to a supplementary card on my account, the platinum card ending in 6077 under the name Jennifer Harland. Please cancel it, effective immediately." I could almost hear the polite professional blink on the other end of the line. "Of course, Mr. Miller. Is there a problem with the account?" "No problem at all," I replied, a cold, quiet satisfaction settling in my chest. "Just tidying up my affairs." I pictured Jennifer at one of her favorite high-end boutiques, the casual, entitled flick of her wrist as she presented the card. The look of confusion, then humiliation that would cross her face when the word "declined" appeared in stark red letters. She took it for granted, that little piece of plastic, just as she took my love for granted. It was the first support beam to be kicked out. My next call was to the mortgage lender that held the note on their sprawling house in the city. A few years back, when they were struggling to qualify for the loan on their own, I had not only co-signed for them, putting my own assets on the line, but I had also made a quiet arrangement with the loan officer, a man named Mr. Abernathy. "Mr. Miller," he'd said at the time, his brow furrowed as he looked over their financials. "Their debt-to-income ratio is simply too high. I can't approve this." "I understand," I had replied. "What if I were to arrange for a direct transfer from my investment account to cover 50% of the monthly payment for the life of the loan? Would that satisfy the bank's requirements?" Abernathy had looked at my financial statement, then back at me, a new respect in his eyes. "That would more than satisfy them, sir." Now I was on the phone with his successor. "I'm calling to cancel the automatic monthly transfer of $7,500 from my account to the mortgage account of Eric and Jennifer Harland," I said, my voice calm and even. "Yes, that's correct. They will be responsible for the full payment from now on." Another beam, a crucial one, removed. They had no idea that I was secretly subsidizing their life to the tune of $90,000 a year just on their house. They simply thought they were managing their finances well. The first sign of trouble came 3 days later. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Dad, something is wrong with my card. It was declined at the grocery store. It was so embarrassing. Can you call the bank?" I let the message sit for an hour before replying with a simple, unhelpful, "That's odd. I'm sure it's just a glitch." The real fun began a week later. My phone rang and it was Eric, his voice a tight coil of annoyance and confusion. "Henry," he said, foregoing any pleasantries, "we just got a letter from the mortgage company. They're saying we missed a payment, a big one. Did you forget to make the transfer?" "Transfer?" I asked, my voice a perfect imitation of a slightly confused elderly man. "What transfer are you talking about, son?" "The mortgage transfer, Henry, the one you've always handled." "Oh," I said, pausing as if I were genuinely trying to remember. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about. That's your house, Eric. Your mortgage. The sputtering on the other end of the line was immensely gratifying. He hung up, not with a goodbye, but with a frustrated grunt. The calls and texts became more frantic over the next few days. They were a symphony of their unraveling. Dad, my card still isn't working. This isn't a glitch. Henry, the bank is calling us non-stop. They're talking about late fees and credit scores. What is going on? Are you doing this on purpose? This isn't funny. I answered each one with the same placid, unhelpful detachment. I was just a tired old man. I didn't handle their finances. They were adults. It was their responsibility. I was simply echoing the same cold, dismissive logic they had applied to me. I pictured them in their beautiful, expensive house, the one I had secured for them, the one they were now in danger of losing. The facade of the perfect, successful couple would be cracking under the strain. The blame would be flying, a hailstorm of accusations. He would blame her for her spending. She would blame him for his arrogance. The cheap veneer of their love, which had always been more of a business merger than a true partnership, was beginning to peel away, revealing the ugly, rotting wood beneath. My demolition plan was proceeding exactly as I had intended. The foundation was crumbling. The walls were beginning to shake. And they, in their blind entitlement, were only just beginning to realize that the problem was not a simple mistake. It was not the forgetfulness of a senile old man. It was the deliberate, calculated, and utterly silent act of a gardener, pruning a weak and diseased branch from the family tree. Their panic was just the beginning. Their desperation was yet to come, and I would be there in my quiet fortress watching it all unfold. When their frantic calls and demands met with my wall of placid denial, their tactics shifted. The panicked confusion curdled into a desperate, insidious strategy. If they couldn't force my hand, they would poison the well. They would paint me not as a father setting boundaries, but as a tragic figure, a man unmoored by grief, losing his grip on reality. It was a classic corporate takedown applied to a family matter. I had to admit there was a certain ruthless efficiency to it that Eric had likely learned in one of his Omnicorp seminars. The campaign began not as a direct assault, but as a series of sorrowful, concerned whispers. Over coffee with old family friends, Jennifer would let her voice tremble. "We're just so worried about Dad," she'd say, dabbing at a dry eye with a napkin. "He's not himself since Mom passed. He's become so forgetful. He completely forgot to pay our mortgage. Can you believe it? He's just not managing his finances the way he used to." Eric, on the other hand, played the part of the long-suffering, pragmatic son-in-law. At the golf club, in conversations with men I had done business with for decades, he would shake his head with a heavy sigh. "It's a delicate situation," he'd confide, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "Henry's become incredibly paranoid. Thinks everyone is after his money. It's a classic sign of cognitive decline. We're looking into getting him some professional help, but he's resisting. It's heartbreaking." They even used Mary. "He was always the practical one," Jennifer would lament to our neighbors over the fence. "Mom was the one who was so generous. Since she's gone, well, he's become so stingy. It's like he's a different person." They were using my grief as a weapon, twisting my love for my late wife into a narrative of my own decay. The effects were subtle at first, then chillingly overt. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, who I had shared a cup of coffee with on my porch every Tuesday for the last 10 years, suddenly started making excuses. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Henry, I have a doctor's appointment," she'd say, her eyes full of a pity that was far more insulting than anger. An old business associate, a man I had mentored, saw me at the grocery store, and instead of his usual firm handshake, he clapped me softly on the shoulder. "Hang in there, Henry," he said, his voice oozing with a condescending sympathy. Let me know if you need anything. Anything at all. He was treating me like an invalid. It was infuriating, yes, but more than that, it was fascinating. I watched their campaign unfold with the detached interest of a seasoned strategist observing the clumsy maneuvers of an amateur. I had spent a lifetime in the world of business, a world of whispers, of backroom deals, of reputations built and destroyed on the turn of a phrase. They thought they were being clever, but their tactics were as transparent as glass. While they were busy with their amateur theatricals, I was engaged in a far more concrete project. My study, once a quiet sanctuary for reading and contemplation, became my war room. I didn't need to document their rumors. I knew they were happening. Instead, I focused on the hard, cold, irrefutable truth. I spent days at my mahogany desk, surrounded by 2 decades worth of financial records, bank statements, investment portfolios, canceled checks, loan agreements. With a quiet, methodical precision, I began to build my case. I created a spreadsheet, a document far more detailed and damning than any performance review Eric had ever conducted at Omnicorp. It had columns for education, housing, automobiles, travel, and my personal favorite, Eric's failed ventures. I scanned receipts for every tuition payment, every down payment, every loan that was never repaid. I compiled a list of every lavish vacation I had funded, every designer handbag I had paid for, every emergency that had been solved with a quiet transfer from my account. Then I turned my attention to more recent evidence. The villa, my supposed rental, had a state-of-the-art security system. I had it installed myself. I retrieved the footage from that fateful afternoon. The high-definition camera in the living room had captured everything. Eric's arrogant monologue, his casual, deliberate act of vandalism, his smug, dismissive laughter, Jennifer's nervous, complicit silence. It was all there in crystal-clear video and audio. My plan began to form, not as a vague desire for revenge, but as a detailed, multi-phase strategy. This wouldn't be one with whispers or rumors. It would be one with a public, undeniable, and utterly devastating presentation of the facts. I began to compose a guest list. It included Mrs. Gable, my old business associates, the members of Mary's book club, and of course Tom and Eleanor Harland. It also included the 2 senior partners from Eric's division at Omnicorp, men who I knew valued stability and reputation above all else. The invitation was for a family and friends appreciation dinner at the villa, a quiet, elegant affair to thank everyone for their support during a difficult time. They would see it as a white flag, a sign that their campaign of pity and concern had worked. They would arrive smug and triumphant, ready to manage the confused old man and graciously accept his surrender. They had no idea they were walking into a boardroom. They had no idea I was about to present a case so thoroughly, so devastatingly, that it would not just end the argument. It would end their entire world. The evening of the dinner arrived with a breathtaking sunset, the sky painted in strokes of gold and crimson, a theatrical backdrop for the drama I had so carefully orchestrated. I had the villa catered, the air filled with the scent of roasted garlic and rosemary, the soft clinking of crystal glasses, and the low hum of polite conversation. The atmosphere was one of relaxed, affluent comfort, a perfect stage for the coming demolition. Jennifer and Eric arrived last, sweeping in with the air of triumphant victors. They were gracious, magnanimous, playing the part of the concerned, dutiful children to perfection. Jennifer kissed my cheek, her touch as light and insubstantial as her sincerity. Eric clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of condescending solidarity. "Good to see you're feeling up to this, Henry," he said, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "We were worried." They moved through the room, graciously accepting the condolences of my friends for my recent difficulties, their faces masks of filial concern. I watched them work the crowd, soaking in the pity that was meant for me. Mrs. Gable gave Jennifer a comforting hug. One of Eric's senior partners, a man named Richard Davenport, shook his hand with a look of solemn sympathy. It was perfect. They were sealing their own fate with every sorrowful nod and deceptive sigh. After an hour, when the wine had flowed freely and the mood was comfortably relaxed, I stepped to the center of the living room and tapped a crystal glass with a spoon. The gentle chime cut through the soft chatter, drawing all eyes to me. "Friends, family," I began, my voice steady and clear. "Thank you all for coming. It means the world to me. I know there's been some concern for me lately. Some talk of my state of mind, my memory." I paused, letting my eyes drift over the crowd before landing on Jennifer and Eric. They stood with beatific smiles, ready for my public apology, my surrender. "I understand there's been some confusion," I continued, and I wanted to take this opportunity to clear the air, to provide some clarity. With a small remote in my hand, I clicked a button. The large, artfully concealed television screen that descended from the ceiling flickered to life. There was a moment of confusion among the guests. Then the screen was filled not with a family photo, but with a high-definition, crystal-clear video. My video. The room fell silent, the only sound the soft lapping of the waves from the beach below. The video showed Eric, glass in hand, pontificating. It showed his casual, deliberate act of vandalism. It showed the snap of the branch. And then it showed his smug, dismissive laughter. The audio was perfect. "You truly are a responsible gardener, Henry. Don't worry, I can pay for this." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. I saw the color drain from Jennifer's cheeks, her perfectly painted smile frozen in a rictus of horror. Eric's face went from smug to confused to a dark, mottled red. "What is this?" he hissed, taking a step forward. "Henry, turn this off. This is a private family matter." But no one was listening to him. Every eye in the room was glued to the screen. I saw Mrs. Gable's jaw drop. I saw Richard Davenport's expression shift from sympathy to a cold, hard appraisal. "As you can see," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence, "there was a small incident with a plant. A plant that Eric, in his professional wisdom, deemed a menial concern. A plant that, as I mentioned at the time, is valued at $7,000. The screen changed. It was now filled with the crisp, unmistakable lines of a spreadsheet. My spreadsheet. But the bonsai was a minor expense, I continued, my voice calm, almost conversational. "I've been accused of being obsessed with money lately, so I thought it might be helpful to review some of my past expenditures." The line items began to scroll slowly, deliberately up the screen, each one dated and described. Jennifer's private university tuition, the six-figure contribution to their wedding, the seed money for 3 of Eric's failed startups, the down payment on their house, the endless loans that were never repaid, the luxury cars, the vacations, and then the line item that made Jennifer gasp audibly. Monthly mortgage subsidy, $7,500. "For the last 5 years," I explained, "I have been secretly paying half of their mortgage, a fact they were blissfully unaware of. They simply thought they were managing their finances well." The final staggering total, a number well into 7 figures, hung in the air, a silent, damning indictment of their entire adult lives. "But of course," I said, my voice softening with a theatrical sadness, "these are just numbers. What is money, after all, compared to a home?" The screen changed again, now showing a picture of the villa, its beautiful lines bathed in the golden light of the sunset. "As you know, I've been renting this lovely villa, a bit of an extravagance for a man in my position, as Eric so thoughtfully pointed out." I paused, letting the tension build. "But there's been a small misunderstanding. I'm not renting it, I own it. I paid $3.4 million for it in cash last year. I had intended at the end of this weekend to give it to Jennifer and Eric as a gift. A wave of shock rippled through the guests. Tom and Eleanor looked at their son, their faces masks of disbelief and dawning horror. Jennifer swayed, and Eric instinctively reached out not to comfort her but to steady himself. "But the final piece of this financial puzzle," I said, delivering the final fatal blow, "is perhaps the most ironic." The screen now showed the logo of Omnicorp Global. Eric has often spoken of his role as a gatekeeper at Omnicorp, a position he earned through his own strength and talent. But here again, there's been a slight misunderstanding. You see, I am a 10% owner of Omnicorp Global, a silent partner. And Eric's prestigious position as HR director was secured not by his own merits, but with a single, quiet phone call I made to an old friend on the board. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. Eric stood frozen, his face a ghastly shade of white, his mouth agape. He looked at Richard Davenport, his senior partner, who was staring at him with an expression of cold, utter contempt. Davenport calmly set his wine glass down, the click of crystal on stone echoing in the silence. He walked over to Eric, his voice low but audible to everyone in the stunned room. "Eric, my office, Monday morning, 9 o'clock sharp, don't be late." It was a death sentence delivered in a monotone. He then walked over to me, shook my hand firmly, and said, Henry, I am so very sorry. I had no idea." The polite party atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating cloud of shame and recrimination. Mrs. Gable looked at Jennifer not with pity, but with a quiet, profound disgust, before turning her back. The members of Mary's book club formed a silent, impenetrable wall of judgment. The whispers started no longer about my supposed decline, but about the breathtaking ingratitude they had just witnessed. Amid the chaos, I saw the first deep cracks in their union appear. "You did this," Jennifer hissed at Eric, her voice a venomous whisper. "Your big mouth, your arrogance, you ruined everything." "Me?" he shot back, his face contorted in impotent rage. "You were right there, laughing along with me. You never said a word." They stood there in the center of the life I had built, a life they had squandered, no longer a power couple, but two drowning swimmers pulling each other under in a sea of their own making. And I felt nothing but a cold, quiet, and deeply satisfying sense of justice. The tables had not just been turned, they had been smashed to pieces. The aftermath of the dinner was not a slow decay. It was a swift and brutal demolition. The guests departed from the villa that night, leaving behind a silence thick with the ghosts of ruined reputations. Jennifer and Eric were the last to leave, stumbling out into the darkness not as a power couple, but as two disgraced individuals bound together by a shared catastrophe. Eric's 9 o'clock meeting with Richard Davenport the next morning was, I'm told, brief and brutally efficient. He was fired. Not for incompetence, but for a catastrophic lapse in judgment and a complete lack of integrity. The gatekeeper had been unceremoniously shown the gate. With his reputation in tatters, every door in the corporate world was slammed shut in his face. The whispers of his public humiliation had spread through their social and professional circles like a virus. The financial collapse was just as swift. The bank, no longer placated by my secret subsidies, initiated foreclosure proceedings on their house. The luxury SUV was repossessed in the dead of night, leaving a dark oil stain on the driveway like a scar. Their friends, the ones who had flocked to their lavish parties, now crossed the street to avoid them. Their phones, once buzzing with invitations and social chatter, fell silent. They were forced to sell what they could: Jennifer's designer handbags, Eric's collection of expensive watches, the art they had bought to impress, not to appreciate. It was a fire sale of a life they had never truly earned. They found a small, cramped apartment in a rundown complex on the other side of town. a place where the walls were paper-thin and the air was thick with the lingering scent of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage. The sprawling, open-plan living room was replaced by a cramped space where the couch was always in the way. The gourmet kitchen gave way to a tiny alcove with a sputtering stove. The humiliation was relentless. Eric, the financial wizard, was forced to take a job driving for a ride-sharing service, his tailored suits replaced by a worn-out polo shirt, his days spent ferrying strangers around the city he once thought he owned. Jennifer, who had once spent her afternoons at high-end boutiques, found herself working as a cashier at a discount grocery store. Her manicured nails now chipped and broken, her face a mask of weary resentment. Their marriage, a structure built on the flimsy foundation of shared ambition and social status, began to crumble under the weight of their new reality. The arguments, I imagined, were bitter and corrosive. He would blame her for her insatiable need for a lifestyle they couldn't afford. She would blame him for his arrogance, his carelessness, the single stupid act of breaking a fragile little thing that had brought their world crashing down. They were trapped in a small, ugly room of their own making, with nothing but their shared failure for company. I, on the other hand, found a quiet, profound peace. I spent my days at the villa, not as a lonely old man in a cavernous house, but as a caretaker of a legacy. I tended to my bonsai, carefully mending the broken branch, a slow, patient process of healing that mirrored my own. I swam in the infinity pool, the cool water a balm on my old bones. I walked on the beach at sunset, the sky a riot of colors, a constant, beautiful reminder that the world was so much larger than the small, bitter dramas of men. Months passed. The seasons turned. Then one rainy afternoon, as I was reading in my study, there was a tentative knock on my door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Jennifer stood on my porch, drenched and shivering, her face pale and tear-streaked. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a threadbare coat. The smug entitlement had been washed away, leaving behind a desperate, remorseful woman I hadn't seen in years. "Dad," she sobbed, the word catching in her throat. She didn't ask for money. She didn't make excuses. She just stood there, stripped of all her pretenses. "I'm so sorry, I forgot. I forgot what was important. I forgot everything you and Mom taught me. I was a terrible daughter." A few days later, Eric came. He didn't knock. I found him standing at the end of my long, winding driveway, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the weary posture of a man who had been thoroughly and completely defeated. He looked up, his eyes filled with a shame I never thought him capable of. "Henry," he said, his voice barely a whisper. I was wrong. About everything. I was a fool." It was a start, a small cracked foundation upon which something new might be built. They had hit rock bottom, and for the first time in their lives they were looking up, not for a handout, but for a hand. I did not offer them platitudes or false comfort. I simply invited them into my home, not the grand villa that had become the stage for their downfall, but my own modest house, the one that smelled of old books and Mary's lingering potpourri. We sat in the living room, the quiet punctuated only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I did not reach for my checkbook. The Bank of Henry was permanently closed for withdrawals. But the main office, the one that dealt in actual fatherly advice, was open for business. I went to my study and retrieved a small, worn, leather-bound notebook. It was nothing fancy, something I had carried with me for years, filled with the hard-won lessons of a lifetime. Mary used to tease me about it, calling it my book of universal truths. I placed it on the coffee table between them. "Forgiveness isn't a gift I can give you," I said, my voice softer than it had been in a long time. "It's something you have to earn, from yourselves, but a second chance that I can offer. I pushed the notebook towards them. This is more valuable than any money I ever gave you. It has no stock tips, no get-rich-quick schemes. It has the simple, boring math of how to build a life, how to make a budget and stick to it, how to tell the difference between what you want and what you need, how to find dignity in a hard day's work. These are the things Mary and I learned together. This is the only inheritance I have left that matters. Their new life was a relentless education in self-sufficiency. Jennifer, who had once spent her days curating her online presence, now worked as an administrative assistant at a small, no-frills firm. No longer did she long for designer handbags. Every dollar she earned was now accounted for, meticulously tracked against her expenses. She spoke of the satisfaction of seeing her savings account slowly grow, even if it was just by a few dollars a week. Eric, after months of struggling to find work, had landed a position as a junior analyst at a small regional accounting firm. It was a far cry from his HR director title at Omnicorp, but his days were now spent poring over spreadsheets for clients who didn't know his former title, and he performed his duties with a newfound quiet diligence. They were perpetually exhausted, their bodies aching not from manual labor but from the constant mental strain of navigating a life without a safety net. Their cramped apartment, while a stark contrast to their former sprawling home, became their classroom. I saw the changes during their new Sunday visits. They no longer arrived expecting anything, but with a quiet humility. Sometimes they brought me a meticulously planned meal, prepared within their strict budget, showcasing their newfound culinary thriftiness. Sometimes it was just a simple, handmade card, a testament to time and thought, not money. They would sit at my kitchen table, their hands showing the subtle marks of their new lives. Jennifer's nails short and unpolished from typing and filing, Eric's fingers bearing the faint smudges of ink from ledgers. They still held hands, a gesture of shared hardship and mutual support. They didn't talk about brands or portfolios anymore. Instead, they spoke of balancing budgets, finding cheaper ways to manage utilities, and the surprising pride in covering their own rent. They would ask questions about the notebook, often referencing specific sections. "Dad, it says here that discipline is more important than the amount when it comes to saving. It's so hard when there's barely anything left after rent and food." "Then you start with a single dollar," I'd tell them. "You start with the discipline. The amount will follow." Our relationship, once built on the shifting sands of financial dependency, was being rebuilt, brick by painful brick, on a new foundation of mutual respect. I was no longer an ATM, I was a father. They were no longer dependents, they were my children, learning, stumbling, but finally standing on their own 2 feet. One Sunday, about a year after their world had imploded, they invited me to their apartment for dinner. The air wasn't filled with the scent of roasted garlic and rosemary, but with the simple, honest scent of spaghetti sauce simmering on the stove. The meal was served on mismatched plates, but the table was set with a care that spoke volumes. We ate and we talked, and for the first time in over a decade, we laughed. A real unburdened laughter that filled the small apartment with a warmth my grand villa had been missing for years. As I looked at them, at Jennifer, my daughter, whose beauty now came not from a makeup counter but from the strength in her eyes, and at Eric, a man humbled and remade by hardship, a profound sense of peace settled over me. The bitter anger had faded, replaced by a quiet, swelling pride. Justice, I realized, wasn't just about punishment. It was about balance. By taking everything from them, I had given them the one thing money could never buy, a chance to discover their own worth. They were still struggling, but they were struggling together. They were building a life, not one of effortless luxury, but one of earned dignity. And that, I thought with a slow, genuine smile, was a legacy Mary would have been truly proud of. They had become truly wealthy, and in witnessing their transformation, so had I. I still have my villa, a quiet place of solace and memory. I spend my days there tending to my bonsai, the broken branch now a gnarled, interesting scar. A reminder that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that sometimes the most beautiful growth comes from the most painful breaks. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.